The Wyoming wind cut through Maeve O'Brien like a blade forged in hell itself. Each gust sent needles of ice through her worn woolen coat, the fabric so thin it might as well have been paper against the merciless December storm of 1881. Her feet, wrapped in cloth scraps that had once been stockings, left bloody prints in the snow that quickly disappeared under the relentless white curtain descending from the pewter sky. In her arms, bundled against her chest, lay her 3-week-old son, silent now, too weak even to cry. His tiny lips had turned the color of winter violets, and his breathing came in shallow, desperate wisps that barely fogged the frigid air. Maeve pressed him closer, trying to share what little warmth remained in her starving body, though she feared there wasn't much left to give. She had been walking for 2 days across this godforsaken plateau, following a wagon trail that seemed to stretch into eternity. Behind her lay Cheyenne, where the bank had foreclosed on the small boarding house she'd inherited from her late husband. Ahead, if the locals hadn't lied, was supposed to be civilization. A ranch. Hope. The storm had caught her this morning, turning what should have been a manageable journey into a death march. Now, as evening shadows merged with the swirling snow, Maeve could barely see 10 feet ahead. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and twice she'd stumbled, barely catching herself before crushing the baby beneath her. Then, through the howling wind, she saw it, a flicker of amber light dancing in the distance. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she forced her frozen feet to move faster. A house. A real house with windows glowing like beacons against the storm. The Carter Ranch materialized from the snow like something from a dream. A solid 2-story frame house with a wraparound porch, its windows blazing with warmth. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, promising heat that Maeve hadn't felt in days. Behind the house, she could make out the dark shapes of a barn and outbuildings, all speaking of prosperity and permanence, everything she'd lost. Maeve stumbled up the porch steps, her numb fingers struggling with a heavy wooden door. She raised her fist and knocked, the sound barely audible above the wind's fury. Seconds stretched like hours before she heard footsteps approaching from within. The door swung open, revealing a man silhouetted against the golden lamplight. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by early silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by the kind of lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. He wore simple clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows, and suspenders that spoke of a working man's practicality. Christ Almighty, he breathed, taking in the sight of her, this half-frozen scarecrow of a woman clutching a bundle to her chest. "Ma'am, get inside before you freeze to death on my porch." Eli Carter, for this had to be the rancher she'd heard about in town, stepped aside, ushering her into a front room that felt like heaven itself. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, its heat hitting her face like a blessing. The room was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and Indian rugs that spoke of a man who valued function over fancy. "Sit here," he commanded, guiding her to a chair near the fire. "You're near frozen through." Maeve collapsed into the chair, her body shaking uncontrollably as feeling began to return to her extremities. The pain was excruciating, like being stabbed with 1,000 tiny knives, but she welcomed it because it meant she wasn't dead yet. "The baby," she whispered, her voice barely a croak. "Please, the baby needs warmth." Eli's eyes dropped to the bundle in her arms, and she saw something flicker across his face. Pain, she thought, though it passed so quickly she might have imagined it. He knelt beside her chair, his movements gentle as he helped her unwrap the infant. "Boy or girl?" he asked softly. "Boy. James." The name came out as a sob. "He's all I have left." The baby stirred weakly in the warmth, and Eli's weathered hands moved with surprising tenderness as he checked the child's breathing. "He's cold, but he'll be all right. You both will." Maeve looked up at this stranger, this man who'd opened his door to the storm and let her into his sanctuary, and felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, which had shattered long ago, but the last of her pride. The final barrier between her and complete desperation. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "About why I'm here. About what I'm willing to, what I have to offer." Eli's storm-gray eyes met hers, patient and unreadable. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, but inside this warm room, time seemed suspended, waiting for words that would change everything between them. Maeve took a shuddering breath and prepared to make the most desperate bargain of her life. The words hung in air between them, like smoke from a dying fire. Maeve's hands trembled as she held little James, her green eyes, once bright as spring grass, now dulled by hunger and desperation. The warmth from Eli's fireplace had begun to thaw her frozen body, but it couldn't touch the ice that had formed around her heart over these past terrible weeks. "I ain't got money," she began, her Irish accent thickening with emotion. "Lost everything when my Patrick died of the fever last spring. The bank took our place, sold off what little we had for debts." She paused, watching Eli's face for judgment, but found only patient attention. "Been walking for days, trying to reach my sister in Denver, but the storm." She gestured helplessly toward the windows, where snow continued to hurl itself against the glass like angry spirits seeking entry. The wind had grown even fiercer, rattling the shutters and sending ghostly moans through the eaves of the house. "You're safe here," Eli said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. "Both of you. That storm's not letting up anytime soon." Maeve shook her head, fresh tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "You don't understand. I can't pay for your kindness. I got nothing left to give except—" She looked down at the baby in her arms, her voice breaking. "Accept him." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackling fire and James's soft breathing. Eli's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his storm-gray eyes. A flicker of pain so deep it made Maeve's own suffering feel small. "Ma'am," he said slowly, his voice carefully controlled, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" Maeve forced herself to meet his gaze, though it felt like swallowing broken glass. I'm saying you could keep him, raise him as your own. He's healthy, strong. He'd make a good son for a man like you. All I ask is shelter through the storm, maybe some food for the road, and I'll be on my way to Denver come spring." The words tumbled out in a rush, each one tearing something vital from her chest. "I know how it sounds, but I love him too much to watch him die in my arms. Better he has a chance at life with someone who can provide for him than—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Eli was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. 5 years ago, I had a wife. Sarah, prettiest woman in 3 counties, with a laugh that could make the devil himself smile. He stared into the fire, his hands clenched on his knees. "We tried for years to have a child, lost 3 babies before they could draw breath, and each one near killed her. The last one took her with it." Maeve's breath caught in her throat. She saw it now, the careful way he'd looked at James, the pain that flickered across his features when she'd mentioned the baby. "This house has been too quiet ever since," Eli continued. "Too empty. Some nights I can still hear her humming in the kitchen, still catch her scent on the stairs." He looked up at Maeve, and she saw something raw and broken in his eyes. "But what you're asking, it ain't right. A child belongs with his mother. His mother's got nothing to give him but a slow death," Maeve whispered fiercely. "You think I want this? You think I haven't torn my heart to pieces thinking of it? But I'd rather break my own soul than watch him waste away because of my failures." Eli stood abruptly, pacing to the window where he stared out into the swirling white chaos. His broad shoulders were tense, and Maeve could see the battle playing out in the rigid line of his spine. "There's another way," he said finally, not turning around. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, and something had changed in his expression. A decision made, a bridge crossed. "You stay. Both of you. Not just through the storm, but permanent-like. I've got more house than one man needs, more land than I can properly manage alone. You could help with the household, maybe the books. I saw you looking at those ledgers on the table like you know your numbers." Maeve stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You want me to work for you? I want you to live here. You and the boy. Make this place a home again instead of just a house where a broken man goes to sleep each night." His voice grew stronger, more certain. James would have a father who'd love him like his own, and you'd have security, safety. No more walking the winter roads with nothing but hope to keep you warm. "But I can't pay you wages, and I've got no dowry, no." "Did I ask for payment?" Eli's voice was gentle but firm. "Did I mention wages or dowries? I'm talking about family, Mrs. O'Brien. Something neither of us has had for too long." The baby stirred in her arms, making small sounds that might have been contentment. Outside, the storm raged on, but here in this warm room, with this man's impossible offer hanging between them, Maeve felt something she'd thought was dead forever beginning to stir. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying, beautiful hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Eli's smile was sad but genuine. "Maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything that matters. Maybe because this house needs laughter again, and that boy's going to grow up strong and loud if I have anything to say about it." He paused, then added quietly, "Or maybe because sometimes the good Lord puts people in our path when we need them most, and it's up to us to be brave enough to let them stay." Maeve looked down at James, then back at this man who just offered her salvation when she'd expected only charity. The choice before her was more complex than any bargain she'd imagined making. Not a trade of her child for shelter, but an offer to build something entirely new from the ashes of their shared losses. The question was, did she have the courage to say yes? 3 days had passed since the storm broke, leaving behind a world transformed by pristine snow that sparkled like crushed diamonds under the pale January sun. The silence was profound, not the oppressive quiet of desperation, but the peaceful hush of a land at rest. Maeve stood at the kitchen window, watching Eli repair a section of fence that had been damaged by the wind, his movements sure and practiced despite the bitter cold. She'd said yes. The memory of that moment still felt surreal. The way her voice had cracked when she'd whispered her acceptance, the relief that had flooded Eli's face, the gentle way he'd helped her to the guest room that first night. He'd insisted she take the large bedroom upstairs, the one with the rocking chair by the window and space for James's makeshift cradle. This was meant to be a nursery, he'd said simply, lighting the oil lamp with steady hands. About time it served its purpose. Now, as she prepared breakfast in a kitchen larger than the entire boarding house room she'd shared with Patrick, Maeve felt this strange duality of her new existence. Gratitude warred with uncertainty. Hope battled with the nagging voice that whispered she didn't deserve this kindness. James gurgled contentedly from his basket near the stove, his cheeks pink with health instead of the terrible blue-white of that first night. The change in him was remarkable, proof that Eli's offer had been more than charity, it had been salvation. "You're up early." Maeve turned to find Eli in the doorway, snow dusting his dark coat and hat. His cheeks were red from the cold, and she caught the scent of winter air and honest work that seemed to follow him everywhere. "Old habits," she said, gesturing toward the coffee pot. "In the boarding house, I was always first up to get the stove going for guests." "This isn't a boarding house, Maeve." His voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to earn your keep every minute of every day." The use of her given name still caught her off guard. Patrick had called her woman or wife more often than not, and the bank officials had been stiffly formal with their Mrs. O'Brien. But Eli spoke her name like it mattered, like she was a person worth knowing. "I need to do something," she admitted, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "I can't just exist here without purpose." Eli accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks, wrapping his large hands around the warm metal. "You've got purpose. You're making this place feel lived in again. You're giving that boy the chance to grow up strong and happy. That's more purpose than most folks manage in a lifetime." Maeve studied his face, searching for signs of the pity she'd expected to find, the condescending patience of a man performing Christian duty. Instead, she saw only sincerity and something else that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. "I saw you looking at the ranch books yesterday," Eli continued, settling into a chair at the rough-hewn table. Patrick teach you numbers? Some. I kept the boarding house accounts after he died. She hesitated, then added, Your books are a mess, Mr. Carter. A laugh rumbled from his chest, the first real laughter she'd heard from him. Eli. And yes, they're terrible. Never had much head for figures. Sarah used to tease me about writing like a doctor with palsy. The easy mention of his late wife surprised Maeve. Most widowed folks she'd known had avoided speaking of their lost spouses, as if saying their names might summon unbearable grief. But Eli seemed to carry Sarah's memory like a comfortable weight rather than a burden. I could help, Maeve offered tentatively. With the books, I mean. If you trust me with them, I'd be grateful. Eli's smile was warm. Fair warning, though, you might find some interesting entries. Last spring, I accidentally recorded buying a dozen chickens as 12 chickens and couldn't figure out why my numbers were off for weeks. This drew a laugh from Maeve, a sound so foreign after months of grief that it startled her. James responded to the sound by waving his tiny fists, and Eli's attention immediately shifted to the baby. He's gotten stronger, he observed, rising to peer into the basket. Color's good, breathing's clear. You did right by him, getting him here when you did. You did right by him, Maeve corrected quietly. I was ready to give him away. Eli's eyes met hers across the basket. You were ready to sacrifice everything for his survival. That's what mothers do. The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. Mother. She was still James's mother, even here, even after everything. Eli wasn't trying to replace her or diminish her role. He was giving her the space to be the parent she'd thought she'd lost the right to be. There's something we need to discuss, Eli said, settling back into his chair, about how this arrangement works. What people in town will think. Maeve's stomach tightened. She'd been so focused on the miracle of shelter and food that she hadn't considered the outside world's reaction to their situation. A single man and a widow with a baby, living under one roof. Eli continued matter-of-factly. Folks are going to talk. Some will assume the worst. Others will push for the most conventional solution. Marriage. Maeve said, the word falling flat in the warm kitchen. Marriage, Eli confirmed. But I want you to know, there's no pressure from me. We can face down gossip if we need to. I've got enough standing in this community to weather some wagging tongues. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by something that might have been disappointment. The complexity of her own emotions confused her. What do you want, Eli? She asked, surprising herself with her directness. He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. I want this house to feel alive again. I want to hear James learning to walk across these floors, see you comfortable and safe. I want to build something good from the pieces we've both got left. He paused, then added more quietly. And someday, if we find our way there, I wouldn't be opposed to making this arrangement more permanent. But only if it's what you want to. Only if it grows from something real. Outside, a hawk circled overhead, riding the cold currents with effortless grace. Maeve watched it through the window and thought about freedom. How sometimes it meant the ability to fly away, and sometimes it meant finally finding a place safe enough to land. One day at a time, she suggested. Eli's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. One day at a time. As if in agreement, James made a contented sound from his basket. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Maeve allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she belonged. April had painted the Wyoming landscape in shades of green that Maeve had almost forgotten existed. From the kitchen window, she could see the first wildflowers dotting the meadow beyond the barn. Tiny explosions of yellow and purple that seemed to celebrate winter's defeat. The air carried the scent of new grass and possibility, a sharp contrast to the desperate cold that had driven her to Eli's door just 4 months ago. James sat in the wooden high chair Eli had crafted during the long February evenings, babbling cheerfully as he gummed a piece of soft bread. At 5 months old, he'd grown round and healthy, his green eyes bright with intelligence and mischief. When he smiled, which was often, dimples appeared in his cheeks that made Eli laugh every time. Letter came from town, Eli announced, entering through the back door with mud on his boots and satisfaction in his voice. The spring roundup had gone well. The cattle had survived the harsh winter better than expected, and 3 new calves had been born in the past week alone. Maeve looked up from the ledger where she'd been recording the latest supply purchases. In the months since she'd taken over the ranch books, she discovered she had a real talent for numbers and organization. More importantly, she'd found a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. From who? She asked, though something in Eli's expression already told her the answer. Your sister in Denver. He held out the envelope, his voice carefully neutral. Molly O'Sullivan, according to the return address. Maeve's hands stilled on the ledger pages. She'd written to Molly back in January, a carefully worded letter explaining her situation without revealing just how desperate things had been. She'd expected a response weeks ago. You should read it, Eli said gently, setting the letter beside her on the table. Whatever it says, we'll figure out together. The casual use of we sent warmth spreading through her chest. Somewhere between learning to trust his steady presence and watching him teach James to reach for hanging spoons, we had become natural, inevitable. Maeve opened the letter with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning Molly's familiar handwriting. As she read, her expression shifted from anxiety to surprise to something approaching shock. She's coming, she said finally. Next week. Says she's been worried sick since she got my letter. And she's bringing her husband Tom to assess the situation and bring me and James back to Denver if needed. Eli's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And what do you want to do? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of everything. What did she want? For months ago, the answer would have been obvious: shelter, safety, survival for her son. Now, looking around the kitchen where she'd learned to make Eli's favorite cornbread, where James had taken his first solid food, where she'd found herself laughing again, the answer was more complex. I want to stay, she said quietly. This is home now. James is thriving here, and She paused, searching for words to explain the transformation she'd undergone. I'm not the same broken woman who stumbled onto your porch in the snow. I'm someone here. I matter. Eli's relief was visible, but he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he moved to the window, watching the horses graze in the spring pasture. Molly won't understand, Maeve continued. She'll see a desperate widow taking charity from a stranger. She won't see. What won't she see? Eli's voice was gentle but insistent. Maeve looked at him, really looked. The man who'd given her shelter had become so much more over these months. He was the person who woke up with James during teething nights without being asked, who'd taught her to handle the ranch horses and never made her feel foolish for her city-bred clumsiness, who listened to her opinions about ranch business and implemented her suggestions without condescension. She won't see that you're not just James's guardian, Maeve said, her voice growing stronger. You're his father in every way that counts. And she won't see that this isn't charity anymore, it's family. Eli turned from the window, and the expression in his storm-gray eyes made her breath catch. Is that what this is to you, Maeve? Family. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. It is. James chose that moment to throw his bread to the floor with a delighted squeal, clapping his hands at the mess he'd created. Both adults laughed, and in that shared moment of domestic chaos, something shifted between them, a recognition of the life they'd built together from the ashes of their separate griefs. When Molly arrived the following Tuesday with her stern-faced husband in tow, she found a scene that clearly wasn't what she'd expected. Maeve answered the door wearing a calico dress Eli had bought her for Easter, her cheeks pink with health and her eyes bright with genuine happiness. Behind her, Eli held James easily on one hip while the baby played with the silver watch chain across his vest, a picture of natural paternal affection. Maeve. Molly's voice was uncertain. This confident woman, with flour under her fingernails and laughter in her voice, bore little resemblance to the broken creature she'd imagined from a letter. The conversations that followed were difficult but honest. Eli showed Tom around the ranch, letting the work and prosperity speak for itself. Maeve explained her role in managing the household and books, the security James enjoyed, the community they'd become part of. Most importantly, she showed them the transformation in her son, From the sickly infant she'd described in her letter to the robust, happy baby who clearly adored both his parents. "But you're not married," Molly protested on the final evening. "What people must think. People think what they choose to think," Maeve replied calmly. "But anyone with eyes can see that James is loved and thriving, and that Eli treats us both with respect and kindness." Tom, a practical man who'd been studying the ranch's account books, spoke up quietly. "She's right, Molly. Look at these numbers. This operation is well-run and profitable. The boy's healthy and happy. And Maeve," he smiled at his sister-in-law, "I haven't seen her this alive since before Patrick died." That night, after Molly and Tom had retired to the guest room, Eli and Maeve sat on the front porch, watching spring stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. James slept peacefully in Maeve's arms, his small hand curled around her finger. "They'll go back to Denver tomorrow," Eli said. "Satisfied that you're where you belong." "Are you satisfied?" Maeve asked. "No regrets about the lost bachelor piece?" Eli's laugh was soft and warm. "The only thing I regret is waiting so long to tell you something." "What's that?" He turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "I love you, Maeve O'Brien. Not because you needed saving, not because James needed a mother, but because you're the strongest, most generous woman I've ever known. You turned this house back into a home, and you turned me back into a man who believes in tomorrow." Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too, Eli Carter. You saved us, but more than that, you saw us. You saw who we could be when we couldn't see it ourselves." James stirred in her arms, opening sleepy eyes to blink at them both before settling back into peaceful slumber. Their son, for that's what he'd become in every way that mattered. As spring deepened into summer around the ranch, the three of them would continue to grow into the family that desperation had brought together, but love had made real. And sometimes, on clear mornings when the Wyoming wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the meadow, Maeve would remember that desperate woman who'd stumbled through the snow with nothing left to lose and marvel at how wrong she'd been. She'd had everything to gain. She just hadn't known it yet.